Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into a really fascinating, multi-layered puzzle. We're looking at a figure named Grace. She's this intricate character woven through the incredibly raw, unfiltered writings of a man named David. If you've ever wondered how the human mind creates entire personas to cope with reality, well, you're gonna absolutely love unraveling this mystery. Right off the bat, reading through David's work, you gotta ask yourself, who exactly is Grace? I mean, is she just an imaginary listener he invented to process his thoughts? A literal future wife he's trying to manifest? Or maybe just a clever literary device? As we dig into the source material, you'll see the answer is definitely not black and white. Part 1, The Imaginary Listener and David's Reality. Let's start by looking at the mind that actually created her. Because to understand Grace, we absolutely have to understand David first. Throughout his writings and audio logs, David gives us a wildly specific, incredibly raw self-portrait. He doesn't shy away from his flaws at all. In fact, he puts them right front and center for the whole world, and for Grace to see. He lays it all out there. He tells us he's a senior, forced into retirement because of memory issues. He openly labels himself as angry, though he's quick to clarify it's the good kind of angry, the kind that fuels his jokes. He mentions he's autistic, noting he won't make eye contact unless he actually likes you. And he freely admits to being a lonely kind of alcoholic, spending his time drinking beer and watching the show Barry. He basically spends his days sitting in noisy public parks, recording his thoughts, just waiting for someone to listen. And there's this wild contrast between his two worlds. On one hand, you have his chaotic audio feed, which is just packed with random news rants, train noises, and the mundane reality of sitting on a park bench. But on the other hand, you have this vivid, highly romanticized AI-generated fantasy of a couple standing beautifully together on a mountain. That massive gap right there, that's exactly where Grace lives. He actually frames almost all of his audio output as literal letters to her. He explicitly states in his recordings that his show is for Grace. She becomes this invisible audience member who gives his endless rants about local news, his personal hallucinations, and his daily park life a highly focused destination. He's not just shouting into the void anymore. He's talking directly to her. Part 2, The Woman in Pink, Visualizing the Fantasy. Because Grace isn't just a blank slate. As his writings progress, she starts taking on a very specific, deliberate physical form. In his serialized fiction, when Grace finally makes her entrance, she pulls up in a blue SUV wearing, in his own words, the brightest pink sweater he's ever seen. And this single piece of clothing becomes a massive, obsessive visual anchor for him. It's an image he literally tries to hunt down in the real world. In his daydreams, she morphs into this deeply specific, gritty archetype of salvation. He writes a scene where Grace arrives in that pink sweater, quote, pregnant as fuck, waddles across a courtyard, hands him a bag full of cash and a hotel room key, and telepathically asks, "You still want me?" I mean, wow, it's a completely unfiltered, visceral vision of being rescued from his park bench reality. And this obsession totally spills out of his fiction. He constantly looks for signs of her out in the wild. He writes about keeping an eye out for women wearing pink tops at Starbucks, or looking for specific signs in the park. He's actively, deliberately blurring the line between his physical day-to-day life and the fictional savior he's trying to write into existence. Part 3, The 7-Day Captive Test. This blurring of reality brings us to the absolute core of his narrative, a deeply intense, highly unconventional compatibility test. In his story, Grace just casually presents him with a pair of handcuffs. She initiates this fictional scenario where they are quite literally chained together and locked inside a hotel room for 7 straight days. The goal? To learn absolutely everything about each other, starting without even knowing her real last name. What's really brilliant about his writing here is the power dynamic. Grace completely takes charge. She holds up the cuffs and jokes with a bit of a smirk that they're a captive audience. It is the perfect setup for the rapid-fire, witty, and super vulnerable dialogue that unfolds between them. Inside this constructed scenario, they establish some intense boundaries, and it becomes very clear that David is in Grace's world now. They navigate using the bathroom in pitch darkness to maintain privacy. They aggressively cross out their last names on documents so their vulnerability stays exactly 50-50. Meals are just left outside the door. And the kicker? These rules are specifically designed to strip David of his usual crutches, demanding totally honest answers while banning his defensive sarcasm. This psychological contrast is where the story really shines. David's self-admitted, chaotic, sarcastic, impatient nature is constantly being challenged. it gets totally neutralized by Grace's incredibly calm, commanding presence. She basically becomes the steady anchor to his turbulent sea. Part 4. The Purpose of Grace and the Psychological Mirror. Stepping back from all this, we really have to ask, why? Why does David go through the trouble of constructing this wild, handcuffed hotel room scenario to begin with? Well, in these letters, Grace functions as this profound psychological mirror. Let's look at how it plays out. When David tells her, "I'm not happy, Grace, something seems wrong," she doesn't coddle him at all. She just replies flatly, "Nothing is wrong, you are impatient." She tells him exactly what he needs to hear, no sugarcoating. And David actually has these moments of incredible self-awareness about it. He admits that constructing these detailed letters to Grace gives him a deep emotional release. It's not just the act of writing, it's the act of writing specifically to her that gives him a unique incentive that a generic writing prompt or messing around with AI just can't replicate. He even explicitly defines Grace in his notes. To him, she isn't just some fantasy future wife. She's a purposefully designed mechanism for accountability. She is engineered by his own brain to be someone who cuts completely through his defenses, his sarcasm, and his twisted logic, straight down to his underlying truth. As the writings progress, David gets pretty philosophical. You know that theory that every cell in the human body is replaced every 7 years, meaning we technically become entirely new people? Well, he doesn't just shout that idea into the void. He explicitly asks Grace to validate this physical and mental rebirth, exploring what it means for his cravings, his addictions, and their potential future together. Which leaves us with one final, pretty profound thought to take away from this explainer. Is Grace just a fascinating quirk of one highly creative, unfiltered man's imagination? Or is she actually a brilliant, universal representation of our own deep, human desire for someone, anyone, to see entirely through our flaws, hold us truly accountable, and love us anyway? Something to think about. Thanks for exploring this with us, and keep questioning the stories we tell ourselves.